confusing because things like this and tube screamers, some people use them as boosts. They'll turn the gain way down. And the volume way up. So there's almost no real difference other than it's louder. And you know, if I'll spare you turning the amp up again, but you get the same effect if I had the amp up and kick the overdrive on. The advantage of using an overdrive over a boost in that situation is A, you've got tone controls, so sometimes when it gets louder you don't want it to be quite as bright. You might find your amp gets a little shrill when you're kicking it up louder, so you can turn the tone down and carve the tone for the boost. Or if that's not quite enough for you, then you can just dial in the amount of gain. And that's basically what an overdrive pedal does. Different overdrive pedals have different amounts of gain. There are pedals that go from practically from overdrive to fuzz. This one is really an overdrive pedal. At its most, you're going to get, which sounds nothing like, or that fuzz actually doesn't have as much gain as some fuzzes, or they're different sounds, and that's an overdrive sound. Basically, part of the deal is it's supposed to sound like an amp and feel like an amp too, and respond like an amp, so that if you set the gain, at a reasonable level. But if I back off my volume, and actually this is a good place to bring up another thing you want to look for in an overdrive pedal, is dynamics. What you want is when you hit the guitar. Oh, that's interesting. I'm going to play the chorus all this time. When you play lightly, you want it to not break up. But when you play harder, because that's what an amp does. If you set an amp to a certain breakup point, when you play harder, a good amp, it should break up more. When you play softer, it will break up less. Another nice thing to listen to is, you hear how it gets a little brighter at the end of the note, or when you hit it harder. I mean, that just gives you this wide range of expression. If you play with that style and you want an expressive playing style. I just remembered I used to play my deluxe with the treble on 2. So that's the overdrive and the boost. Any questions so far?
Are they both at preamps?
They're technically, that's what they would be. Yeah.
How about when introducing noise? Is one better than the other?
Whether a boost or a preamp, if they're well made, neither one should really introduce that much noise. I mean, what's that?
On a board, they do.
Well, we'll discuss that in a second. But I mean, there's on, there's off on the overdrive. There's on the boost, there's off. I would, if you're having noise problems with an overdrive or a boost, I would A, look into the particular pedal you're using, and B, it's funny, I just got through having a pedal board built over at XTS, Exactone, and I'm doing an article for Premier Guitar on those guys, and I'm building pedal boards. Hey! And Barry was very clear about you've got to check your power supplies. You know, that the power sources and the power supplies and how they interact with the pedals can have a big effect on your noise. So if you're having noise on your pedal board from your preamps or your overdrives, I would take it over to Barry at Exacto and have him take a look at it. But definitely look into that kind of thing, because they really shouldn't. I mean, if you're using a lot of gain on an overdrive, yeah, it might introduce. I'm just boosting this as far as we'll go. Let's turn up the amp a little bit. That's without it. That's with it. But you know, so this might be an interesting point to introduce the concept of signal to noise. Signal to noise means the amount of noise you get in a ratio with the amount of sound you're getting. So if the noise is almost as loud as the sound you're getting, that's when you're in trouble. But almost everything will introduce some noise, the point being that, you know, if it's rated in dBs, so if the dB level if the noise is at like 5 dB, when your output volume is at 70 dB, it's not an issue. If the noise is at 30 dB when your output level is at 70 dB, then you have an issue. I mean, and there are some pedals that will introduce it. I mean, excuse me. I mean, the fuzzes will definitely introduce more noise than an overdrive. This happens to be actually pretty quiet for a fuzz. Yeah, I have the overdrive all the way up. You know, everything's going to introduce a certain amount of noise when it's on. The other way to deal with noise, people use noise gates if they have noise. My noise gate is called a volume pedal. So if I have a pedal or something where I have to be ready to play and I have noise on it, I just take it down on a volume pedal. Or if I'm stopping in the middle of a quiet passage, but I don't want to turn off the pedal and have to turn it back on, there's my noise gate. Dead quiet. And I've become very much aware that I do a lot of singer-songwriter gigs. And in Manhattan and in house parties and stuff like that where you have to play really quietly. That's one reason I had these pickups put in. I mean, I have a 65 Strat and I had these pickups, DiMarzio Virtual Vintage put in. Because when I'm doing this kind of stuff with a singer-songwriter, and if there's neon lights in the room, and the noise could be coming up faster than the sound, and you just can't have that. So that's, do these sound as great as I haven't had the 65 Strat pickups. Don't anybody have a cow? I haven't had those pickups in years. But I had a lot of other pickups in there and a lot of other quote-unquote vintage sounding pickups, but I just could not deal with hum anymore. So these went in and they sound fine to me. So that's the sound thing. Any other questions on boosts or overdrives? Okay. We'll move on to the next level of